The West Philippine Sea Newsletter, Volume 17. The Philippines congratulate China's 75th anniversary, and China lodges more protests. On October 1st, the Chinese Communist Party will celebrate the 75th anniversary of one-party rule over the Chinese mainland. The Philippines, which has been in an ongoing dispute with China over territorial claims, sent messages of congratulations and well wishes to the Chinese leaders. Despite the well wishes, the issues in the West Philippine Sea are still tense as a new Philippine Coast Guard ship arrived in the Sabina Shoal and the Philippines announced the deployment of a U.S. missile system. Tensions in the region continue to escalate as evidenced by China's lackluster response to the Philippines' well wishes. The Philippines Foreign Affairs Undersecretary Teresa Lazaro on Thursday provided an official response to the 75th anniversary. China's leaders have transformed the economy within a generation and achieved the UN goal of poverty alleviation, lifting an estimated 800 million people out of poverty, according to UN metrics. Undersecretary Lazaro noted that they accomplished this achievement ahead of the schedule, alleviated food insecurity for millions, and ensured universal education for them. She did not mention that mass forced urbanization played a crucial role in the educating of a large number of people and streamlining food distribution, and that the introduction of Western-style free markets in China paved the way for its rapid ability to lift millions out of poverty. However, this forum is not the appropriate place to discuss this particular aspect. Undersecretary Lazaro also praised China's leadership in Asia in addressing climate change issues through its energy and green transportation initiatives. Vice President Sara Duterte echoed this sentiment in a separate video address on green initiatives, highlighting that despite their differences, the two nations maintain a strong relationship based on a, quote, mutual trust and mutual respect as equal sovereign states, end quote. Vice President Duterte's address was not the official address of the Philippine government, but it was noteworthy because she is the most likely successor to the current president, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Both Duterte and Lazaro acknowledged the complex and serious challenges in the current Chinese-Philippine relations, emphasizing the need for amicable resolution. On September 25th, the United States and Philippines announced that they had reached an agreement to allow the U.S. Army Typhoon missile system, deployed in April to the northern Philippines as part of an exercise, to remain in place. The presence of the missile battery has not been a focus of Chinese military protests, as they have stated that the missiles were destabilizing the region. The Philippines had previously announced the removal of the missiles by the end of September, but this week, Philippine Secretary of Defense Secretary Gilberto Teodoro Jr. confirmed an indefinite extension to the missile deployments. The Chinese Foreign Ministry, as expected, protested the decision by again stating that the missile's presence was destabilizing and can create an arms race in the region. Secretary Teodoro rejected the Chinese demands and stated that the Chinese demands were an attempt to interfere in the internal affairs of the Philippines, which is an example of how China deflects any criticism of its Taiwan policies. Secretary Teodoro went on to state how China is trying to use intimidation to keep the Philippines from building its defensive capabilities. He continued with a scathing demand that before China criticizes missiles deployed in the Philippines, it should lead by example and, quote, destroy its nuclear arsenal, remove all their ballistic missile capabilities, get out of the West Philippine Sea, and get out of the Mischief Reef, end quote. Mischief Reef is one of the islands that China illegally seized in 1995 and is one of 7 artificial islands in the South China Sea that China has deployed missiles on. Secretary Teodoro also remarked, quote, don't throw stones when you live in a glass house, end quote. The statement exposes the hypocrisy of the Chinese government, which impose obligations on neighboring countries that it does not intend to fulfill itself. The Philippine government announced on Thursday, September 26th, that the Philippines had reestablished a presence in the Sabina Shoal, called the Sabina Shoal in the Philippines. 2 weeks ago, Chinese forced the BRP Teresa Magmanawa to leave the shoal when it prevented its resupply and eventually rammed it, creating a large hole above the waterline. The Philippines announced that a new Coast Guard ship was patrolling the area to protect its sovereignty in the region. The unanswered question is for the region is, how will the fate of the new Philippine ship fare any better than Teresa Magbanua? China has protested the Philippines' presence in the shoal and sent more ships there in response to the Philippines' action, but the Philippines has not addressed this question. Foreign Affairs magazine published an online article on its website stating that the ongoing issues in the West Philippine Sea require not stopgap measures as seen with the Sierra Madre and the Second Thomas Shoal, but more aggressive actions to seek a longer-term solution. It stated that Marcos' transparency policy served a purpose, but he needs to pull back on it by not making the Philippine resupply missions announced media events that almost dare China to respond, or otherwise, China will be embarrassed on the world stage if it doesn't respond. The publication's prescriptive elements are sound, as it explicitly states that China does not seek conflict in West Philippine Sea, despite its desire for resources. The authors suggest that the Philippines should approach Washington with specific requests to support its resupply policies in the region and maintain its presence in the EEZ. The United States, in return, uses its soft power to engage China to respect the Philippine efforts and not to cause a physical confrontation. The assumption is that China is bluffing about how far it will go in the West Philippine Sea, guiding the U.S. negotiations with a carrot and stick approach. The approach, while logical in nature, overlooks two significant issues with China. The first was the diplomatic overtures to engage constructive dialogue in the Western Pacific were largely ignored by China due to its petulant reaction to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's flight to Taiwan, despite China's threats to intercept her aircraft. The dialogue recommended earlier this year, the dialogue has recommenced earlier this year, but there's no assurance that China will sustain these ties and disregard U.S. overtures. This would require the U.S. to find alternatives to force China's engagement. The other issue is that China does not appear to be reacting to the assumption of the press involvement at this point in documenting the Chinese tactics in the South China Sea. The Chinese Coast Guard rammed a Philippine Coast Guard ship operating in the West Philippine Sea in the middle of the night, while a CBS News crew for the news show 60 Minutes was aboard. This shows a complete disregard for whether the news crew was present or not, and taking action in the middle of the night when no one was filming shows that the presence or non-presence of media has any impact on aggressive Chinese behavior. The Philippine government's tepid reaction to the Chinese government's tepid reaction to its 75th anniversary and its protests over the presence of one Coast Guard ship and one missile battery demonstrates that constructive engagement to resolve the issue is a priority at this time. The Philippines' suggestion to specifically request what it needs from the U.S. and to aggressively engage China diplomatically does have merit, as it could increase the risk to China if it continues its current aggression towards the Philippines. There is no guarantee that this will work, but the United States will have to take a bigger and more active role in attempting to de-escalate tensions and support its allies in the region.